The Queen's Jewish Link presents the Jewish Living Podcast, the show that examines the many facets of Orthodox Jewish life. Here's your host, Izzo Zwirin.
In the course of raising children in today's society, every frum couple will inevitably discuss homeschooling. For most families, it's just a throwaway idea. It's not generally something that just any parent can do. A smaller group of parents tend to discuss homeschooling as an alternative to the heavy burden of paying tuition, but slowly realize that this too is an unrealistic option, as the savings often do not exceed the loss of one parent's income. However, there is still that small sector of the population that really look into the pluses and the minuses of homeschooling their children. This week on the Jewish Living Podcast,
my name is Yael Hanover, and I homeschool my kids, and there are a lot of them from age 13 down to age 2. And that makes me interesting.
We are lucky enough to steal some time away from Yael, who has her hands full as a busy mom and a homeschool teacher to her 4 children/students, plus one more too young to be enrolled, and discuss many of the considerations homeschooling families have to weigh. And no, it's not all about the tuition. So tell me, who might not know what that is, isn't a big deal.
Like places. So I grew up second. They're so polite. And now so I or prevents a child culture, but didn't have a lot of
which to be honest, that's not.
And then when I went to college,
they
totally would. So,
yeah.
They're rude and horrible and would be hurtful. That I learned the hard way that I have to.
A kid. I think that's every parent.
Where I am now, basically. Right now.
You are now that we're talking to you.
For some my job, also computer. I on the emotional labor.
Coral Springs, Florida, and that's going to be actually integral to our.
A couple.
You have to be on the same page with that. You homeschool all of your children and a variety of aged children. So let's start with you personally. When you mentioned that you went to college, were you at any point in your life homeschooled?
No, I was not.
And your husband?
No.
All right. When did you decide to start homeschooling your kids?
So that's where the interesting comes in. I think that my how did I get where I am now is a lot more typical, but how did we become a homeschooling family? So my kids didn't even all start out as homeschooled kids. We used to live in Brooklyn, and when we did, Menachem Mendel, my oldest, who's now 13, went to Lamplighters in Crown Heights. So he started in a Montessori Hasidic yeshiva, Lubavitch Hasidic yeshiva, and he was there for kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And Izzy, Yisrael Simcha, who is now 9, was there for not pre-K, but the year before pre-K, his first year of preschool. And so for Izzy, it wasn't such a big deal, but the summer after Menachem Mendel's 2nd grade year, we moved down to Florida. And in Florida, our choices for schools were a lot more limited. In Brooklyn, you have everything. You have all hashkafas, all sorts of teaching styles, access to anything. And in Florida, even if you are in one of the really dense Jewish areas in North Miami Beach or in Miami, those are 2 separate things, just FYI, your choices are still kind of limited. And when we first moved here, we were actually very far from Miami, and we were even kind of far from where we're living now. And we had one choice that was about an hour away, and it is a typical Lubavitch day school that does English and Hebrew studies, and it's all frontal learning. And then our choices down in Miami were a little bit more diverse, but they were up to a 2-hour drive away. It just wasn't feasible to put a kid through that kind of drive. So it started out as mainly like a time restraint thing of like, it's just too far to take him to a school that would work for him. And there was a preschool in our area. We were in Palm Beach Gardens, which Jewishly is just kind of like, there's a lot of conservative, there's a lot of reform, and there really isn't much if you're from. But they had a beautiful preschool, and Izzy did his pre-K year there, and he loved it. But after pre-K, there weren't any options available. So I started out homeschooling Menachem Mendel with a lot of material from Lamplighters. They were incredibly helpful and gracious in answering my questions and like sending me material, giving me access to things. And we started by just like giving over a lot of that material. And I started very slowly with like picking out other things for him that would be that would work.
We'll get to the actual curriculums that you use a
Okay.
little bit later on. But I just want to get to the startings of it. I know that there are many people out there that have different reasons why they would homeschool their kids. So you mentioned the fact that you didn't like the options of schools near where you live. It's
Right.
not that you have a problem with yeshiva education in general, which is a reason that I've heard. It's not that you had a problem with tuition, which is a problem that we hear all the time. It's that you didn't like your specific choices that you have in your area, and the best option available to you was to homeschool. So it seems like to me
Right.
that it was more a choice of elimination rather than this is what you wanted to do from the beginning.
Right. So that's how it started. It started
Okay.
as this was the best option for Menachem Mendel because he had developed a Montessori learning style. He was a self-starting, self-directed learner. So to put him either in the mainstream day school that was an hour away, which was not an awesome drive, but could possibly be conceivable. So to put him in a mainstream frontal learning classroom where he wouldn't be able to pace himself, where he wouldn't be able to discuss material as it went, that wouldn't have worked for him educationally. He wouldn't have been doing his best. So we started homeschooling, yes, because that was the best option for him. And at the time, we had it in our heads that we would probably end up sending Izzy to Hebrew Academy, thinking that he might do well to be mainstream. So that was the beginning. It started as this is the best choice for my kid.
And then I guess now that you're up to child number 4, is that right?
Child number 4 being like on a curriculum or child number 4 in general?
Child number 4 bringing on a curriculum.
Yeah, number 4 on a curriculum.
So number 4 is on a curriculum. So then after you had your 2 oldest, then it just kind of snowballed and you went with it for the rest of them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it actually really, we went with it for the rest of them when we bought this house here in Coral Springs. Now where we live, we're 15 minutes away from the mainstream yeshiva day school from Hebrew Academy. But when we discussed with Izzy, who at the time would have been going into kindergarten, when we said, okay, Menachem Mendel's going to keep homeschooling, he was devastated at the idea of going to school and being gone for the day and his brother getting to stay home. Like he felt like he was being like kicked out of the house. And it was like at that point that I realized like either we're a homeschool family or we are a school family. And it really was hashgacha pratis because where we thought he would have done well mainstream, we later learned was totally not the case.
Wow. Oh, that works out really nicely. I'd like to talk about the challenges and the advantages of homeschooling, especially for our audience out there that might be considering this for whatever reason that they have. So for you, we've already mentioned that you have 4 different children on 4 different age levels.
Mhm.
How is that working out in terms of the challenge of teaching those with one person teaching them?
So that is difficult to implement. we're very lucky in that we're structured well to be a homeschool family. Like it fits our personality as well. In that, like, Menachem Mendel's a self-starter. He does not need to write a work plan every day. He knows what he needs to do every day, and he gets up and he does it. Like, my husband will take him to shul in the morning, hopefully, usually, if they can both get up and moving. And Menachem Mendel comes back from shul, he'll eat something, and then he does chitas, and he does some lessons on the computer, and he just like moves through it. And then my other kids, so Izzy and Maishi, need more input and more guidance. Izzy's 9 and Maishi is 7. And they will make lists. I'll have to make them a list. They'll copy it down. They'll start following it and then like come and get me for input as they need. And then Spock's 4.5, almost 5. And well, there's a reason that 4 is a 4-letter word that starts with F. It's my least favorite age. He is a delicious, delightful, amazing human being, but he is also, he just like does what he wants whenever he wants to. And as the day goes on, because he's 4. That's what they do. It's just what they do. And so as the day goes on, I basically just try and like throw education at him as he like zooms past. I'm like, hey, this week is salad. Let's talk about that. And he's like, no. And then later, maybe he'll be sitting down and I'll like sneak over with a little basket of cards that like have dalids on them in different shapes and forms. Be like, hey, do you want to make a dalid out of Play-Doh? And then maybe he will. And then like hopefully by the end of the week, he will have learned a letter. And maybe even I will read him a story somewhere along the way and he just like picks things up. But and then Nerys is 2.5, so whatever. So mainly the older 3 have lists that they have to accomplish, and they have lessons that do require my input. And I can really try to structure the day so that I know, okay, I'll be here at this point and I'll be here at this point, and whatever, teaching this thing at this point. But I also have 5 variables who will like throw that to the wind. So if I try to just be there when they need me, and if I can't, then I'll have to rotate and somebody will have to wait, and I'll be like, okay, you just go read extra for right now, or take a break, or go play your guitar, or I'll get to you for your Chumash lesson when I can.
Right. So let me ask you this. You're on your 4th child that you've potentially been going through the same kind of curriculums over the years. I'm assuming you haven't been changing them up every single year for every single area. Sometimes you recycle those things, correct?
Yeah.
So do you find it more difficult or more challenging if one child is on a different level than the previous child who went through this? If they're getting the material differently, if there's something that differentiates for them on how they learn, if child number 3 is not picking up on something the same way that child number 1 picked up on. I'm sorry, I'm going to try to remember each one's names, but for the purposes, I'm just going to number them.
Yeah.
But do you find that's difficult for you, or do you not see that so much?
Well, I guess like you could call it difficult. I feel like for me, part of the fun of homeschooling is really getting to know your kids. I mean, of course, everybody knows their kids and knows their personalities, but like understanding how they think and how they learn has really been very interesting for me. And it hasn't been so much a question of speed or cognitive ability with my kids, but like more like their leanings and how they think. Like Menachem Mendel is like halacha and facts all day. Like he doesn't want like the story or the multiple levels of why this halacha how it affects our neshamas and whatever. He just wants to know, is it kosher or is it not? Okay, great, moving on. But Izzy wants the stories and the chassidus and the explanation and the why. Yeah, and the halacha also, but he wants the why. So like a program that did not work for Menachem Mendel, the Yahadis curriculum, Menachem Mendel just like could not get into it. He would literally rather like sit down with the Rambam and be like, okay, it's this, all right, great, fine, enough. But Izzy will like read Yahadis for fun, and he will read like 3 pages about the same halacha and like how it affects us, and like this story from this gadol and this tzaddik and this rabbi, and how it was applying there. That works for him. So I wouldn't call it difficult. I feel like that is like part of the real fun is
Right.
finding.
So as a mother and a teacher, let's first do the positive. Do you find, I don't know if you have anything to compare this to, I guess back when Menachem Mendel was in school, but do you find that you know your kids better by the fact that you're their teacher and their mother than somebody who, just did the classic, I'm their mother?
I mean, I guess like I'm with them all the time.
Right.
So yeah, I think that like I have, maybe I do know them better. I have a like deeper understanding of how they think. I also like I have more of a tab on, what's happening with them socially. Not that I like I'm not saying that I like helicopter try and control them, but like I can be confident and comfortable that like my kids aren't getting bullied or harassed or abused. Whereas, when your kid's in school all day, you don't know, and it's terrifying. And like I was bullied and abused in school, and like for years. I mean, like we're talking about like 9 years. And it was just like, well, whatever, it's part of what happens. So, I mean, I definitely know what they're experiencing, more than a parent that's not with their kids all day.
Right. So you mentioned that when we as parents send our kids to school every day, we don't know in theory what's going on over there. Even as communications between schools and parents increase, like I get an email from my kids' teachers every day, every other day, giving me an update as to what happened. And of course, if there's anything that happens specifically with my kid that I need to know about, I will get a call from the teacher.
But your kids are also little.
My kids are little, but yeah, and I don't expect that to happen as we move along. But I do know that communication between parents and their teachers have increased, especially with the advent of various platforms that schools have started using. You obviously don't need to worry about that. You know what your kids are learning. You see them all the time. And there's definitely the advantage in that. You don't have to worry about things like bullying and cliques and things like that happen in school. I know that one of the criticisms of homeschooling is the potential for the lack of social skills to develop amongst children. And I see that you're smiling now, but have you thought about that, or have you seen those things?
I mean, I've had it said to me a million times, and it's very silly because, like, first of all, like, why do you need to be around your peers for 8 hours a day to be social? And like, why do you need to be forced into a particular group of peers in order to develop social skills? That's my first thing. Like, that's what social is? Like, is that how you're defining being social?
Before you go into second of all, for those people that with those criticisms, just think about your job. I work in an office all day. I don't interact with people on a daily basis all the time. I'm mostly in front of a computer. And as a matter of fact, I would imagine that a lot of jobs, or not most jobs, but definitely a plurality of jobs, don't require you to, interact with people all the time. So to that point, I agree with you.
I mean, like, it's exhausting. Like, if I think about what you expect from a kid every day, for them to, and they're on for 6 hours or more. They're not sitting at a computer. They're not in their office. They're in a room with 20 something of their peers, and they're receiving information, or they're having conversations. There isn't like quiet time. And if it's a kid who's introverted, or a kid who has sensory processing issues, or a kid who might be neurodiverse, like, I can only imagine, first of all, that that's miserably exhausting. And like, as a neurodiverse person myself, who went through it for, who did the school thing for years, like that, I remember, like, it's exhausting.
Can you explain what neurodiverse is, just so people who are listening who might not know what that is?
Okay. So neurodiverse refers to a person with a diagnosis that you might otherwise call like a learning disability, like dyslexia or ADD or autism spectrum disorder, that kind of thing.
Okay. And you had a second reason why the social skills thing isn't a big deal.
Right. So the second reason is my children are very social. I mean, first of all, I personally am our family like places a lot of emphasis and a lot of value on just standard politeness. Like my children have a reputation for being the ones who say excuse me, please, and thank you, and wait their turn to talk when they're in other social groups besides in our family, because in our family, they're just wild apes. But thankfully we've taught them to leave that at home, and when they go elsewhere, people are like, your kids are so polite. But as far as social interaction with other people and providing social interaction with other people, my children are very active in shul. They go to shul every Shabbos, and whenever there's a program for the kids, they go. And they go to day camp. And my oldest is a Boy Scout and has been for a year. And now the next two, that would be Izzy, 9 years old, and Maishi, 7 years old, just joined Cub Scouts. So they have social groups, they have friends. There are a lot of kids in our neighborhood, which they see on a daily basis. But also, I know who those kids are, and I know the circumstances under which they are interacting with those other kids. And in particular, when it comes to scouting, BSA has really, really strict social interaction guidelines and safety guidelines. So I know that there's no possibility that my children are going to be harassed or pranked or alone with a child who is larger and older than them and has the potential to abuse them in some way, or an adult who could abuse them in some way. Whereas while the schools may say like, oh, it goes without saying that these things could never happen here, there's no policy that prevents a child and a student, or a child and a teacher, from being in a room alone together.
Right.
Or a child and a larger, older child from being in a room alone together or a bathroom alone together. And you don't know what could happen. When my children are socially interacting, I know that they are in places where those policies are in place.
Right. And we had a story up here in New York just last week where one school had an assistant principal removed because he was dealing in child pornography. So I don't think that that's something that you will ever have to worry about as long as they're being homeschooled.
Nope.
Right. To be honest, that's not the norm. It's just something that's not an impossibility.
Right. Absolutely. And like, I know that my kids are safe from that. I know that my kid, like, unless someone breaks into my house, my kids are safe from school shootings. My husband went to Stoneman Douglas. Stoneman Douglas is our high school. Like, if my kids went to public school, that's where they would go to high school. It's another thing that's like very, very close to us. And while it might not have been a factor in my decision, it makes me feel better to know that it's not something that I have to be afraid of.
Right. So let me bring it back to you as a mother and a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that you have to draw the line at different places, or is it kind of seamless where at this point of the day your teacher and at this point of the day your mom, and there isn't really a problem of overlap? Or is it more like I'm mom/teacher all the time?
I'm mom/teacher all the time. So whereas like my kids might not necessarily, like, if they were at a share at shul, like, they wouldn't interrupt Rabbi Granite and with like commentary about like, oh, this interesting thing, whatever. But me, if I'm giving the same share, they totally would. And maybe that's a line that I might have to start drawing, because like I said, my younger kids now are in Cub Scouts, and I'm not the troop leader, but I'm like helping to run the meetings. And my kids will be like in the middle, I'm trying to run things for them and 12 other kids. And then Izzy will be like, well, actually, and later, not now. So.
Yeah. What about you as a person? I know for me, I take my kids to school in the morning. I come home and I could turn off work and turn on being a parent. My wife does the same thing. Take the kids to school in the morning, go do your job, come home, and now you're a parent. Do you find it at all overwhelming, or do you find that you don't have that separation? And is that at all difficult for you?
It can be very overwhelming. There will be days where like I will be on from the moment my eyes open or even earlier because they'll just crawl into bed with me until like 9:30 or even later depending on what's going on. And there's definitely a point at the day where like I wouldn't say it out loud to them because that's rude and horrible and would be hurtful to them, but I'm thinking like please just stop talking to me because it will be literally like 14 to 16 hours of somebody's always talking to me, and it's always like the kids are always talking to me, and I won't talk to another adult sometimes in that whole stretch. Yeah, it can be very overwhelming, and I learned the hard way that I have to be very vigilant about making sure that I have my own time and space to take care of myself that isn't just doing chores. And sometimes that'll mean that like the laundry piles up so that I can like veg out for an hour and watch a show without thinking I'm taking care of someone right now.
I don't think that's unique to somebody who homeschools their kid. I think that's every parent.
Right. That's true. But the feeling of emotional labor of constantly like if an adult approaches you at work with a request, it's perfectly reasonable and acceptable to say, I'm doing this thing. Can I get back to you? You can't do that with a 4-year-old.
Right.
And even with a 9-year-old, you have to consider the emotional impact of whatever it is you're going to say and how you're going to say it. Particularly, like you have to keep in mind the temperament of the particular child, which is, another huge factor to why we continue to homeschool. So, my kids could be very sensitive to me saying, I need space right now, or can you just not right now? And that would be another factor that I would have to put into how I respond to something. So yeah, I definitely, I do get overwhelmed, and especially when there are long stretches of days where I don't get time without the kids requesting things from me. And I found that like last year towards the end of the school year, I was really like hanging on by like a really, really thin thread because it had just been like day after day after week of constantly being on as a mom. And part of that was me not being able to define what do I need in order to not be on.
Right.
Because like for somebody who goes to work and then comes home, when you're home, you're relaxed, right? Like you're home from work. You're not doing your job anymore. So while you might be with your kids, it's a different vibe. It's a different.
Right. So I wouldn't say relax, but it is definitely a different vibe from when you're at the office or whatever it is that you do for a living. It's definitely different. But for you, I feel like it's not.
Right, because my house is my office. My kids are my job. They're also the greatest joy of my life. And like, I'm really lucky that like in the middle of my workday or at the end of my 17-hour workday, I could look at the subject of my work and get that, woo-woo sparkly feeling that you get from looking at your kids. And I imagine that's not something you get, when you look at your computer. So like that, I'm super lucky with that. But again, like that emotional labor can really, really take a toll. And I had to examine where I was putting in all the emotional labor, how I could delegate it, and like how I could reasonably delegate it. too. And, without, because, it's not like I keep saying like my 17-hour work days, whatever. It's not like my husband's sitting around eating bonbons. Like, he runs a very busy accounting office, and we both work late, and like, he's on in other ways. So it's not like I could just be like, well, you had the most relaxing day in the world, have all this stress. We have to find a balance. But I also had to know, like, what do I need you to do? Like, what can I hand off here? And even like, it was just it might sound simple, but like I was saying, like, I need a day off every week. Well, like, duh, people who go to the office get a day off. But like, for me, that meant like, I need to be able to sit on the couch on Shabbos with a book that doesn't have cardboard pages or like a golden binding, and a cup of coffee. Like, I need that in order to be a human being.
Right. And
But
that's
I
what
needed
you
to
have.
figure that out. I needed to know that I needed that.
Right. And I guess that's where you and your husband kind of have to be on the same page with that. You mentioned that he works all day also, and when he
Mhm.
comes home, you can't just dump all the kids on him and say, "All right, they're yours now. I'm off," because he also
Right.
had a hard day. It was a different hard day than your hard day, and maybe he was doing something else and he wasn't with the children, but it's
Mhm.
not like, "Oh, he's finally home. Here he is." And I would imagine that anybody that would want to do something like homeschooling would have to find that balance with the working parent.
We do. And, and he even like, and, amazingly, like, he'll even come home and like do some of the housework, not like a ton, but like, if I leave the dishes, I don't have to worry about, they'll still be there in the morning, even if he comes home at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. Like, there's that
Right.
intrinsic understanding of like, if something's left, it's left because I need you to do it, and he manages, which is really awesome and fun.
All right. So you mentioned your husband is an accountant. He runs an accounting office. One of the pluses of an Orthodox family not sending to yeshiva and doing homeschooling would be the savings on tuition. And I was wondering if you guys did the calculations, considering that that's kind of your husband's job, as to what the savings are by doing it this way as opposed to sending to school.
Yeah, funny you mentioned. So because my husband is an accountant and a financial planner, so life insurance and disability insurance are, very important in our family, to the point where we will pester our friends to make sure that they have adequate life and disability insurance. So we had gotten all of our life insurance things straightened out, and then he was trying to get me a disability policy. Now, long-term disability policy, is intended to replace your income should you, chas v'shalom, become disabled.
I could see where this is
And
going.
right, so for him, it was like chick chock. His company had a matching program. Great, no problem. Then for me, they said they couldn't write me a policy because I didn't have an income. And he said, that's ridiculous. She saves us $85,000 a year in tuition. And it like
That's
boggles my
amazing.
mind. But the truth is, I would have 5 kids in school, because my daughter would have to go to daycare, because it's not like that extra, 68 grand would come out of the air. I would have to go to work. And I mean, with my credentials, could I earn that much money? No, not at all. No way. I mean, unless I was like an influencer or something, but
I would wonder if it would be possible to set up you as an LLC or as some sort of an educational entity, and then you pay you. Maybe your accounting husband can go look into that.
right? Like, I'm sure if anybody could figure that out, it would be him. I imagine that if when he listens to this podcast, either he will be like, wait a minute, or he'll just be listening to it, just like shaking his head.
If there's any accountants out there listening right now, they're all like, yeah, that's a scam, or like, wait, that is brilliant. Either way, either we're onto something or we're way off.
Right, right. Just we'll be the non-accountants who like blew the lid off of accounting.
That's right. So we spoke about a little bit of the challenges. You mentioned a couple of the pluses in terms of safety and in terms of individualized learning and smaller class sizes and lack of bullying and the tuition savings. Are there any surprises that you guys have seen that you didn't expect, either positive or negative? I know you mentioned like you needing you time as one of those surprises, like, oh yeah, that's something that we didn't consider before. Any positives or negatives that somebody who was planning about potentially doing a homeschooling program with their children didn't consider beforehand that maybe they should?
So I want to dial back to something I said earlier on when I talked about how we knew that Menachem Mendel would not be a good fit for a frontal learning classroom, but we thought that Izzy would be fine being mainstreamed. And we turned out to be completely wrong. And that was serious hashgacha process, because Izzy has very severe ADD, but on the Hefech, he is very well behaved, and he's not impulsive, and he has and I'm not just saying this because I'm his mother, and I'm not just saying this because like every mother thinks that their kid is Einstein. He has a genius level IQ. So if he had been mainstreamed, he is smart enough and well behaved enough and concerned about pleasing his teachers enough to fly under the radar, so he wouldn't have been disruptive. But his ADD is severe enough that he would have missed everything. Like he would just have not absorbed information. And
So he would have flown under the radar both in behaviorally but also educationally.
Right. So academically, he probably would have totally floundered, and it wouldn't have been noticed as a learning disability. Probably would have just been noticed as, oh, he's not applying himself enough. Or, maybe he would have skated by, but his potential would have been completely missed. And moreover, he's extremely emotionally sensitive, which is a very normal factor in ADD. There's like a chart of the emotional age of a person with ADD versus their actual age, and I think it's something like a third less than your actual age is the estimated emotional age. And he's very intelligent, and he I mean really 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 intelligent, but like I said, very very sensitive. So he would have picked up on any kind of like emotional disconnect from anyone else. And the kids who are more prone to bullying, who are more prone to picking on the more sensitive kid to make themselves feel better because they're able to extract a strong emotional response, he would have been that kid. He would have been the target for that, and it would have just destroyed him. And just like imagining that just kills me. And so I'm very very glad that he didn't end up in that situation. But moreover, intellectually, he would have been so cheated, because the likelihood of his ADD having been found, because he wouldn't have been a behavior risk, is pretty low. So we would have missed so much. And it's only because he was at home and I was able to be with him and learn with him on a moment to moment basis, and literally be able to watch in his face the point where he would like be trying really hard to follow what I was saying, and then he couldn't anymore and his eyes would just be gone. And before we started him on medication, which of course I wrestled with like every parent probably does, I remember sitting with him, getting him to write. And it wasn't like, okay, now, okay, fill it in a full sentence. Give me a full sentence. I remember saying to him, you need to finish writing that R. He would be in the middle of a letter and space out.
Wow.
And it's not his fault. And it's not his like it's literally his brain does not make enough of the chemical to efficiently carry the signal of write an R to his hand and keep it there, and it would have gone under the radar. He would have been lazy, maybe he would have been like, maybe it's just not that bright, whatever. But that's not the case at all. He is literally brilliant. He is a genius. But his ADD is so severe that in order to unlock his potential, he needed that much attention for me to be able to notice that he wasn't able to pay attention.
Right. That is definitely an advantage of the individualized learning that you would get from homeschooling that you wouldn't necessarily get from a classroom until they got into, let's say, a resource room. But you're saying that because he wouldn't have necessarily been a behavioral issue, then they might not have seen it initially.
Right, exactly.
Wow. Okay. Let me talk about other parents. I'm going to ask you one positive, one negative. Let me ask you about other parents' unsolicited opinion about your decision to homeschool. And on the flip side, have other parents asked you to take on their kids?
I've had like the joking, and then I've had the occasional like, well, maybe you would consider, and the answer to that is a hard no. I mean, even with my closest, bestest, and I've helped like occasionally, and I'm talking about like my closest, bestest, like been able to like get over a hump, educationally. But no, I would not ever, ever, ever take on anybody else's kid full time, because as much as I love it and we have a great time and we learn a lot, there's so much potential for me to screw them up forever. And I'm only willing to do that to my own children, not anyone else's. And also there's even the children that I love dearly, who are my children's best friends and, my nephews, I would not, I can't spend all day with them. I can't do it. So, yeah, it has occasionally been asked semi-jokingly, definitely jokingly, and then like jokingly, but if I were to say yes, they would have totally brought the kid over the next day. And the answer would always be no. And then other parents' unsolicited advice.
Not necessarily unsolicited advice, but unsolicited opinions about whether or not you should be homeschooling.
There's always the people that I don't know very well who would, of course, like jump right in with the like, but socializing. But anyone who knows me, and knows my kids just doesn't even bother. And really, like I don't really socialize a lot. I don't get out much. So I don't really get a chance for strangers to say stupid things to me. And anyone that I really do get a chance to talk to is generally supportive. Since my free time is really limited, I'm very picky about how I spend it.
And I do appreciate you spending some of that free time with us.
Oh, well, of course.
I enjoy that you're spending some of your free time from not teaching your kids or being a mom talking about how to teach and be a mom.
Considering it's all I do all day, I don't really have much else to talk about.
So let me talk about the future. How long do you consider keeping them homeschooled? Are you going to keep them? I know that Menachem Mendel is getting to be a teenager soon, I think. Oh, no. Is he already a teenager?
Yeah, he's already a teenager.
He's already a teenager, so...
His bar mitzvah was Rishon Shel Pesach.
Oh, wow. Okay, so, yeah, I guess he's 8th grade level at this point. So high school, do you plan on keeping him home, or what's the plan after that? I guess the plan would be different for different kids depending on their situations.
Right. So, yeah, this is actually the question I've been getting a lot lately, and the one that I guess I have kind of gotten a more sideways looks or more maybe feedback for. Our plan currently is to keep them home through high school. All.
Okay.
Again, at this point, it really did come down to what our choices were, and because of the whole from culture. Our choices here were expanded. A lot of people send their kids away for high school. So our choices here were expanded, but they still weren't what we wanted. I did not want to send my kids to Mesivta. I won't send my kids to Mesivta. We're not going to stop their secular education in the 8th grade. It's not happening.
And when you say Mesivta, that means sending to a yeshiva without a secular education, correct?
Exactly. And our local yeshiva high schools that have both, there's again, like, nothing wrong with them, but that's where the real, like, social danger happens, is high school. And that's where the adults around are going to have a lot less tabs on the kids that my kids are interacting with and what those interactions are like. And that's not the time that I want that experiment to be happening. And it's not important enough to me to send them out to high school to take that chance of them being in that social environment that may not turn out the way that we want it to, either bullying wise or frumkeit wise, or just behaviorally. That's not when I'm ready to start making that experiment. And I know that socially they're going to continue on the path where they are, where they're going to be continuing going to shul and continuing in scouts. And so I know that they're going to have social skills and social interactions, and I know that they're going to be with quality individuals in a safe environment. And educationally, as they get into high school, our options really expand with regards to home learning. There are a lot more resources for high school classes, dual enrollment classes, AP classes that can be accessed from anywhere. And then also Yiddishkeit wise, with more advanced Limudei Kodesh, there's a lot more access. And our choices, while they would expand physically if we were to go the physical school route, they're also expanding internet wise.
Right. So you actually have been doing a lot of good for me tonight in setting up my transitions, because the last question that I was going to ask you is about resources for parents who potentially wanted to homeschool their kids. So both in the Limudei Kodesh and the Limudei Chol, where would be some good resources for parents to look to?
So first of all, look in your own bookshelves and your own toy boxes, and you may find yourself very surprised. And from there out, talk to other teachers, find out what the curricula of the local schools are, what the curricula of the peers are going to be. And from there, you can find a lot of resources. For Limudei Kodesh, chinuch.org is amazing. And it's a really, really wide variety of resources. Chabad.org, also excellent. And having access to a Jewish bookstore, whether it's online or brick and mortar, is really, really imperatively important. And then, like, secularly, there are some really, really great online resources. Khan Academy, we've been using Khan Academy for 4th grade. We've been using Khan Academy like since we started school, so like probably 4 or 5 years. And they're constantly adding more courses and resources. And then, like, following your kids' interest, you can find really amazing ways to teach your kids about what they're interested in. And if you use your seichel and you use your own investigative instincts, like, you can come up with really amazing things. So and, like, the magic of Google. If you Google 1st grade science curriculum, it's not going to necessarily, like, throw you to, like, Jillian, the homeschooler who goes outside and picks flowers with her 1st graders. And, like, if you know what you're looking at, you can find, like, the next generation science curriculum, which is an actual, like, science standard and, like, nationally accredited.
And it's not a Star Trek thing.
Right. No, not Star Trek, the next generation science standard. but you gave me an idea. Thank you, Izzo. No, so one thing that I'm actually doing this year, which I'm super stoked about, is using the next generation science standard. I am developing a science curriculum for first grade. That's me, she, using the Magic School Bus as my main resource.
The new one or the old one?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So the science standard gives you the topics, and then using episode directories from like IMDb and Wiki whatever, I evaluated what would fit them best, and then we do hands-on experiments to follow up with it and to reinforce what we've learned. So like so far we've learned about light and sound waves using these two episodes were both the old Magic School Bus, and it totally lined up with the first grade science curriculum, and maybe even gave them a little bit more information than they might have had before. I say they because whenever I do something with Meishi, I generally do something or have available something reflective for Spock. So especially if it's going to be a show, I'll let him watch, and then like sound waves, we were doing like rubber bands on tissue boxes and like banging on things to watch things vibrate. And for light, we did reflection and refraction and translucence and opaque, like taking flashlights and like shining them around to see how things would work, and putting a pencil, or no, it was a straw, putting a straw in a jar of water to see how it looked like it was bent. And, so Spock can totally hang out and see those things happen. Whereas Meishi's the one who's like getting the credit at the time. So basically, to go back to your original question, the national standards are available if you know where to look. And where do you look? So first of all, start with the ubiquitous, start with Google. Like, it's simply what it is you're looking for. I'm looking for, like I said, first grade science curriculum. And then as it comes up, use your brain to check the resource that you're using. If it's a blog and there's no citations, right, this is not where you want to be. But if this is a cited site, with a bibliography and outside references, then that's going to be a lot more creditable. And and again, like if you're looking for let's say multimedia references, then you're going to want to go with something older and more vetted. And we're talking about Netflix versus YouTube. So like the Magic School Bus is written by scientists and teachers. YouTube is some guy in his garage. You don't know.
Right. It's like citing Wikipedia for a research paper.
Exactly. So, you got to know what you're looking at. And, but for Limitei Kaidesh, really, I think the best thing that we have found is having an extensive library of our own.
Okay. Yael Hanover, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
And thank you for taking your free time out to talk about what you do when you don't have free time.
Well, thank you for having me. And considering that's just about the only thing I really do have to talk about. If you ever want to do a podcast on Disney World, however, I guess you could call me. Other than that, I'm tapped out.
Thank you so much. My thanks to Yael Hanover for her extremely candid take on homeschooling and for sharing so much of her personal side of what it takes to pull it off. As we've already mentioned, this is obviously not for everyone. In fact, it's probably for very few people. But we hope that the information in this episode of the Jewish Living Podcast is a good starting point for anyone considering beginning homeschooling. That's it for now. We'll speak to you next week. Kol Tov.
The Jewish Living Podcast is produced by Swirly Pikus. Our theme song is The Band by A.B. Rottenberg from Journeys 4. You can email the show at jewishlivingpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Jewish_living. The Jewish Living Podcast is recorded in conjunction with the Queen's Jewish Link.